I am so thrilled to be able to speak to the IB family this morning. I have one grandson who just graduated from the diploma program. I have a second grandson who's going to be entering that program in another year. When I started teaching in North Pole, Alaska, over 44 years ago, I realized that my job as a teacher was to prepare my students to think well. And it concerned me that, I am so sorry, but I am missing. Found it. Looked on the wrong side. I'll get back to my talk. When I started teaching 44 years ago in North Pole, Alaska, it concerned me that I felt like people were talking about the curriculum I was to teach, but they weren't talking about developing my students to use their minds well. And that was always one of my goals. It was always one of my passions. But as I went on in my career, I felt as if I was starting to just throw information at students, and I wasn't finding the time or the right kind of vehicles to help me develop the minds of my students. So 25 years ago, I discovered the idea of the conceptual level of knowledge and thinking. And it opened a whole new world to me. And I've spent the last 25 years looking at how do you use the conceptual level to develop students' thinking to a higher level. When I saw the IB programs a number of years ago, I said, finally, somebody gets it. This is exactly the kind of program that fits my philosophy. Not only the global consciousness, but the conceptual level of work and the use of the content in highly sophisticated ways to develop deep understanding and for students to create meaning. And so today what I'd like to do is share with you some of the findings and the understandings that I've come to over the last 25 years. And I'm going to actually ask you to do a few little activities as we go through this presentation together. Here's what I'd like to think about. Why does the IB value its concept-based curriculum and instruction model? Because as my work is concept-based three-dimensional, I see also that IB is a concept-based three-dimensional model. How is knowledge structured? This is something I had to figure out even after getting a doctorate. Nobody taught me how knowledge is structured. I think every pre-service teacher should be helped to understand how knowledge is structured, because it's very germane to how we raise the students up academically and personally. I'd like to talk about different types of concepts. Macro concepts, which in primary PYP we call key concepts, and in the MYP we call significant concepts. And I'd also like to talk about those disciplinary concepts, which I'm going to refer to as micro concepts. These are very powerful tools when used in the right way, and they'll help develop synergistic thinking, which is a new idea that I'd like to share with you. I think synergistic thinking is the key to intellectual development, and I'll explain that. And then I would like to end with a little video clip of a teacher teaching concept-based, a third-grade teacher who is actually doing a structured inquiry, raising students thinking above 4 pieces of literature and integrating their thinking at the conceptual level. And I think you're going to find it a very powerful piece to support the presentation I'm giving you today. When I start working with people, sometimes they come into my audience and they look a little like this. In fact, I was working with a group of principals in the United States for a 2-day workshop on concept-based curriculum and instruction. And as I looked around the room, this is what I saw. But actually at the end of that 2-day workshop, one of those principals had come and given me this picture, and he said, "Lynn, this is how we felt when we first came in." And I kind of got the feeling is, do I really want to be here? And this sounds a little hard. He said, "Lynn, at the end of the first day, this is how we felt." I said, "Yes, I have seen that look before." Now, you know, that's all the pictures he gave me. I could not come here and leave us looking like that. This is an IB audience, so I'm hoping that when we end this period, you will look like this. So stick with me, and we'll go for a little ride with concept-based. We know that the world that we're preparing our students for is so different than the 1950s and 1940s. And I've been in this business so long, I was telling someone before that I've seen so much change. Oh my goodness, the impact that technology has had, global communication, interdependence, the traveling that everyone is doing. My parents would be amazed at how much I'm traveling now globally compared to what they were able to do. It's changed so dramatically. And when you look at the kind of words that frame the world that we're preparing our students for, some of these can resonate with you, but I think the word for the 21st century is complexity. If anything, our world is more complex than it has ever been before. And that means that our students must develop the different kinds of thinking skills to help them process information and apply information and see patterns and connections. Critical thinking, creative thinking, reflective or metacognitive thinking, and conceptual thinking. And I've spent the last 25 years really looking at conceptual thinking. What is it? How do we use it? How does it work with the structure of knowledge? And when you look at the IB learner profile, you can see that thinking is a big part of what we want our students to be able to do well. It isn't just about content, it isn't just about definitions of concepts, it's really about that synergistic thinking between the factual and the conceptual levels to solve problems. Because really, information without intellect is quite meaningless. What good does it do to memorize facts and dates ad infinitum if you can't use them, apply them, or extract from them the lessons of history? When I look at a traditional curriculum design, which has traditionally been more topic-based, and IB is becoming much more concept-based, it doesn't mean you don't teach facts, but it means you don't just stop with facts. And one of the problems with the traditional topic-based model is that we can't teach it all anymore, and it can fail to develop the personal intellect of students. I really think now that our personal intellect is our conceptual mind. It's how we make sense of our world and how we make sense of what we're learning. And we can't just assume that it's happening. I know now that when I was in the classroom, because I really knew nothing about the conceptual level, that I would do facts and activities, and they would be creative, and I would make an assumption that my students really understood the concepts of the disciplines or the conceptual understandings of the discipline. I now realize that we have to be more explicit in our use of concepts and conceptual ideas. Another problem with the topic-based is that it's inefficient. When we can go to a computer and Google whatever we want as far as information, then why would we spend all of our time just covering more and more information? How do we want to use our classroom time? How best can we use our classroom time? And given the kind of world that our students are living in, it's much more important now that we rise to using facts to think about important ideas and understandings. A history teacher sent me this unit that he was teaching in his class, and he said, "This is the formative work of my unit." And he said, "It's only a partial list," and I couldn't help when I was typing it up to add in parentheses "to cover," because you can see what kind of teaching this would effect. We would have lecture, we would have coverage, and we would have factually based tests with no consideration of, so what? What are the lessons of history that we want these students to take away? So facts are important. You can't teach without facts. You can't understand a concept without facts. And you can't understand a conceptual idea without facts. The question is balance. How much time is spent on facts? And how are we using the facts to develop deeper conceptual understanding that can transfer? And that's the key word. What I just showed you is what I would call a two-dimensional curriculum model. That is a coverage of facts and skills. And the three-dimensional model is what my work has been about and what I see the IB work as being about. We still teach critical facts and skills, but we always think of them now in the context of what concepts can I help my students develop in their brain so they can start to pattern and sort new examples of that same concept from other places, other subjects, other times, and what conceptual understandings do we want our students to put into their brain. For example, if I'm teaching about the American Revolution in the United States, I can teach a lot of facts. But if I want students to be concept-based and to be able to transfer knowledge, then I'm going to use the American Revolution as a tool to understand ideas like freedom and independence and revolution, and talk about revolutions that are happening for freedom throughout the world and across time. I'm giving my students a frame in their brain for processing new information tied to what they already know, rather than just treating every event in history as a separate event. Let's compare a two-dimensional and a three-dimensional model. The two-dimensional model is more coverage-centered, and the problem with this is it's an inch deep and a mile wide, for sure. But I love to think of IB and also my work as being idea-centered. My job isn't just to throw out facts. My job is to get students to think about important ideas by using facts, concepts, and conceptual understandings. Another problem with the two-dimensional model is that it's intellectually shallow. And for the kind of world that we're living in today, we must be concerned about developing our students' ability to think. The conceptual lens in my work is similar to what you call in the PYP the key concept, the broader concepts, and what we call in MYP the significant concepts. Those actually serve as a lens or a higher level construct to look at whatever it is that we're studying. And it really affects that synergistic thinking that I'm promoting. Another problem with the two-dimensional model is it does not transfer. The example I gave you of the American Revolution is locked in time, place, or situation. But in a concept-based model, we teach the important content, but we draw out the transferable knowledge so that students can start to form brain schema for patterning and sorting and finding commonalities between events. And finally, I think that for the 21st century, we've got to have a higher intellectual model. It's a very complex world, accelerating change, and the ability to think well is critical. Every citizen needs to be a good thinker. Here's what I'm telling teachers. Your work isn't just on one level. It's not just what you want students to know. So think about what they are to know as the factual knowledge you teach, but realize that you also teach on another level. You want students to develop conceptual understanding from what it is that you're teaching out of critical content. So always think of what you want students to know as those critical facts. I may want them to know the 3 states of matter. I may want them to know the causes of the American Revolution in my country. But I want them to understand important concepts and ideas that they can take and transfer to other situations. So conceptual understanding transfers across cultures, through time, and across situations. The IB curriculum model is a concept-based, 3-dimensional model. That's why I fell in love with it when I first saw it. It's idea-centered. It's intellectually challenging by design, and it fosters collaboration, social learning, and meaning-making. Any concept-based classroom has to have students working collaboratively, because if they're only looking at the back of another student's head, I know they're not learning very much. But if they're constructing knowledge, working together, thinking together, and dialoguing together, then I know for all of them, they're going to have a much richer learning experience and come away not only with more factual knowledge, but also with deeper conceptual constructs in their brain. So let me talk to you about something that I think is the most important thing when I teach for people to understand, and that's how knowledge is structured. Let me give you an example. There are relationships between the topics and facts we teach, the concepts that we draw out of those topics, and when we put those concepts together and we make statements of understanding that transcend time and place, then we're talking about generalizations and principles. Again, in IB terminology, we're calling these generalizations central ideas in the PYP and significant concept statements in the MYP. I'm also suggesting that as you do formative work in your unit, that you write some more of those generalizations to support conceptually the formative work that you're doing with the content within your units, because that will enhance the idea-centered focus for teaching and learning. If at the PYP level we're doing a unit on my family, We can teach many important concepts like families, cooperation, alike and different. And if I rise to the level of asking myself, so what idea do I really want them to develop? And some of these people in PYP are using these generalizations as their lines of inquiry. I might want students to understand that families cooperate to get things done, or families are alike and different. You notice when you get up to the level of the generalization, you're not talking about my family anymore. You're talking globally about any family. And so you have to write statements that are supported by facts. And if they're not true in all cultures, then you sometimes, if it's an important idea, may use a qualifier, often, can, or may. But the point is that you want students to understand the bigger idea that transfers. So the structure of knowledge is really similar to structures that we have in the plant and animal kingdom to keep order and to organize things. Nothing is wrong with structure. Structure is a very good thing. It's how you teach and how you guide students within that structure that really develops the intellect and increases creativity. Here's an example from MYP. If we're looking at early European migration, we might teach lots of facts. But if we're a concept-based teacher, as IB is, then we're going to think about what concepts we can bring out of that particular topic that might be developmentally appropriate at this age. Concepts like migration, cultural diffusion, needs, and change. And then again, we're going to think, what is it I really want my students to understand that they can transfer? I might want to work with the idea that people adapt to changing environments, or I might want to work with the idea that migration leads to cultural diffusion, resulting in social and economic change. Ideally, what we want is for students to come up with their own generalizations out of the content we're working with. But we have to teach students how to do this bridging. And I will tell you that after 15 years of working with teachers and asking them, so what? Why are you teaching this? And asking them to write these conceptual understandings to guide learning in a structured inquiry, I find that they have a difficult time wordsmithing. And I say, if you cannot articulate what it is that you want students to understand, then how do you know they have understanding? Because truly what I discovered was that much of the teaching that I had done was assumption. I had wonderful activities, I worked with facts, and I somehow had an idea in my head that I wanted an understanding, but I hadn't articulated it well for myself. And I made an assumption that students understood that. I want to give you a fun little example. I was taking a chemistry physical science class at the university level of Alaska. And my professor had worked on the atom bomb. And one day he came in and he wrote a 24-line equation on the board. I mean, just numbers, letters, superscripts, subscripts. And he just never really talked directly. He just lectured and we copied down notes. Well, being the good student I was, I copied down 24 lines of equation, every number, letter, superscript, and subscript. And after I left the classroom, I said to my friends, oh my goodness, this is going to take me days to memorize this formula. They said, Lynn, don't be silly. Nobody would expect you to know that formula. I said, no, I think it was important. He spent the whole period, I'm going to memorize it. It took me 3 days to memorize this formula. But I'll tell you what, it paid off. It was the final exam. Give the formula. So everybody else stood up, handed in an empty paper. I wrote down every number, letter, superscript, subscript, and the next day he came in and he said, Lynn is the only A in this class. And I was mortified and I sank down in my chair because, you know, if he'd been a good IB teacher, what would he have asked me to do? Stand and explain the formula to the class, right? I had no idea. I think it was the formula for the atom bomb. I truly do. I really do. I've seen little men in gray coats peering out from pillars as I go through life, and I think it's the government and they think I'm onto something. But truthfully, he did not ask me to stand. I got an A in that class, and I could not tell you even the first letter of that formula today. So he truly missed the mark. As brilliant as he wasn't a very good teacher because he made the assumption that because I could regurgitate a formula, I had understanding. I had no understanding. So that's not what we want to do. So at the MYP level, the generalizations are your significant concept statements. And I'm suggesting you might want to think in the formative work of adding a few more based on the content you're working with. Because one of the things we want in all our planners is to have that coherence conceptually, not just at the beginning, but carried all the way through the unit to the end, even to the assessments. When we get into the diploma program, the conceptual understandings really are made with concepts that are more specific. And when I think about PYP, MYP, and diploma program, and that alignment all the way through the grades, you can align them through the complexity, the increasing complexity of these generalizations. And so this is a transferable understanding that might go in a world history class or some other class. But notice that the concepts in red are much more sophisticated than what we would see at a PYP level. By the way, for those of you that teach PYP, that's a very concept-based level already. When you think about preschoolers, almost everything they're learning is a concept. What is the weather? What are seasons? What is family? What is an animal? It's all a concept, and we're engaging them and using their conceptual minds to understand those through lots of different experiences. And by the time students are in the diploma program, the conceptual understandings that we work with should be much more complex. But notice you would have to have the factual support to understand these ideas. So the factual support is extremely critical. I'd like to talk a little bit about math, because sometimes math has had confusion about the word topic. And that's because whenever we say topic in math, we're most likely talking about a concept. So for the structure of knowledge, when I say the topic is measurement of distance and speed, measurement, distance, and speed are all concepts. And so math is a conceptual language. Almost everything we're teaching in math is a concept. So don't get thrown by the word topic, just think broader concept, and then break it down into sub-concepts for the next level. So we might be teaching about slope, derivative, line, graph, and velocity. And when I think about what I want students to understand in math, the conceptual ideas of math, not just the skills that they're doing, I might want them to understand that velocity is mathematically represented by the slope of a line. Or I might want them to understand the idea that the slope of a graph at a particular point indicates the instantaneous rate of change, which is the derivative. In other words, in mathematics, we've trained teachers to do skills, but we now have to also add, so what are the conceptual relationships that accompany those skills? And that's another reason why I like IB. Because I think we're really moving in this direction to not just do the skills, but to actually unpack the conceptual understandings to support the skills. I think that one reason that many adults are uncomfortable with math is not that they couldn't do the algorithms and perform the functions. I think it's because they did them perfunctorily. And I don't think they really understood the conceptual language and the conceptual relationships of math. So we have quite a bit of work to do yet in the math area, but I tell you, I know a lot more about math now than I did when I was just doing the algorithms as a child. So what is a concept? It's an organizing idea, it's a mental construct. And if you have a word and you're wondering, gee, is this a topic or is it a concept? Run it through this little test. It will never fail you. Concepts are timeless. We've always had the concept of conflict, right? We're always going to have that concept. Wars come, wars go. Husbands come, husbands go. I'm just making sure you're still awake. Wives come, wives go. I've got to tell you, this is such a cute story. My husband and I were married for 25 years. We got divorced for 8 years, as people sometimes do. Well, after an 8-year divorce, I moved up near our married daughter. And guess who lived in the area? My ex-husband. And I kept bumping into him at our daughter's house. He was so cute and he was so sweet. One night I took a risk and I said, say, would you like to go to a movie? That was 15 years ago. We've been back together ever since, and it's working like a charm. So you never know about that ex-husband or wife. You might find. I'm telling you, the second time around, they look pretty cute. So concepts are timeless. They're universal. And that's why they're wonderful in the IB program, because you know that each country has different curricula and content. But if you structure that content through concepts and conceptual understandings, you can use any content because concepts are universal. And they make wonderful organizers for curriculum because, as I said, we've always had the concept of conflict. We're always going to have it. The concepts don't change. We may add a new one now and then or change the terminology, but concepts are constructs, mental constructs. Concepts are abstract, but to different degrees, and this is a very important point that I wanted to share with you today. Some concepts are very big and broad. We call them macro concepts, and you're very well aware of those when you look at key concepts and significant concepts, although significant concepts sometimes are more specific coming out of a discipline. But they range from very big and macro to very micro within a discipline. When I talked about imperialism, nationalism in that history example, those are more specific concepts. Concepts are represented by one or two words or a small phrase, but not a sentence. If we're talking about a concept, it's one or two words or a small phrase. The sentence would be a generalization or principle. And all of your examples will share common attributes. If we're talking about conflict, the attributes are opposing forces and friction. All right, I'm going to test you. Intelligence. Do you think this is a concept, a mental construct across cultures, or do you think it's a topic? Think about it. You can talk to your neighbor. I'll give you a couple of seconds. All right, let's just see a show of hands. How many think it would be a construct, a mental construct? Different cultures may define it somewhat differently, but it would be a mental construct in every culture, basically. Actually, it is, because cultures may use a different word for it, they may define it differently, but every culture would have a construct for what they would consider to be an intelligence. How about this word, transportation? Do you think it's a topic or a concept? You can talk to your neighbor for a second. Okay, let's go with your base feeling. How many think that it's a topic? Anybody? Some. How many think it's a concept? Some. How many are abstaining because they don't like my choices? You are correct. It is depending on how you use it. If I talk about the transportation on a certain roadway on a certain day, I'm locking it in time and place. I'm treating it topically. But if I'm talking about the idea of transportation, moving things from one place to another, then I'm treating it conceptually. So it depends on how you use some words. You have to be a little careful. But it leads into this point. Let's look at these list of science concepts. Which of these would you consider to be macro concepts? Like the key concepts in PYP. Which of these are macro? System, change, order, because they can be taught across almost any subject area, correct? But which of these concepts would you consider to be tied most clearly to science? We say we're working in the science discipline with these concepts. What do you see? Organism, energy, matter, right, and I had one on there the other day. Habitat would definitely be in the, sciences area. So the point is that we work with concepts at different levels. When we want concepts to transfer across subject areas, then we're working with macro concepts because they give us breadth. They give us great transfer. If I teach about a system in environment, when I'm working with the environment, I can teach about an environmental system, but the attributes of what a system is, I can transfer over when I start talking about an economic system. But you've got to be careful that you don't start talking about all kinds of systems in the same unit. You know, do it logically. Do they fit together? Is it important? Or are we going to just confuse kids by going all over with every kind of system? If we do math systems in the same unit we're doing environmental systems, that might get very confusing to a child. But the micro concepts are just as important as the macro concepts, because the micro concepts give us disciplinary depth. And the smartest people in the world have disciplinary depth, not just breadth. And so I'm a huge advocate of that's why we need more of those conceptual understandings, whether we call them supporting ideas or whatever, built into our formative work. Because if we don't, we're not going to, through the grades, develop the kind of disciplinary depth that we need. In MYP, we talk about the need to do interdisciplinary work. But you can't do your whole curriculum in an interdisciplinary format, because our disciplines have different characteristics and different concepts. And you may end up watering down the discipline, the disciplinary depth, if you try to put always everything together into interdisciplinary units. And the truth is, we do need interdisciplinary units when we're looking at critical problems and issues. But the best interdisciplinary work comes when you have strong disciplinary offerings. Does that make sense? So you need to develop the disciplinary knowledge and the disciplinary depth within that subject, but you need to bring it together then to look at interdisciplinary issues and bring that rich disciplinary work into those interdisciplinary units. Does that make sense? Okay. If it doesn't make sense, I'll be out in the foyer after and I'll meet you for coffee. Okay? All right, so generalizations are the same as a central idea or a significant concept statement, or if you were to write some more generalizations for your formative work, I just think that enhances the idea-centered nature of the work that you do. Conceptual ideas and generalizations, by definition, are two or more concepts stated in a sentence of relationship. You would never have a proper noun in the sentence. You would never have a past tense verb, because then they wouldn't be timeless and they would be place-bound or situation-bound. And these generalizations must transfer through time and across cultures. And when students can take factual knowledge as support for the conceptual understandings, then they have deep understanding and the transfer of knowledge. Another important point: when you're working with these supporting ideas in the formative work, you don't want to tell the student the generalization at the beginning of the lesson. You want to guide them inductively so that they can inquire into the questions and the learning experiences that you've developed, so that they can come up with either the one that you had been thinking of, but perhaps other ones. And you celebrate when a student raises their hand and comes up with a generalization from their inquiry that you hadn't even thought of, and you say, why do you say that? And they can justify their idea. Do you see what I'm saying? When students can think about a conceptual idea but use the facts to support that idea, that's what's called synergistic thinking. It's that interaction between the factual and the conceptual levels of thinking. And that's really our goal for developing the intellect. I'm going to do a little activity with you, and I've given you a lot of concepts that related to Japan's triple disasters that occurred in early 2011. But because we're short on time, I've actually taken the structure of knowledge and selected 4 concepts. And I'd like you to do a little word game right now and see if you can think about Japan's triple disasters. Pick out 2 of the concepts, 2 or 3 that you like that could go together to finish the understanding on line 3. So you're going to write a generalization. And whenever you're training teachers on how to write these generalizations, I always use the little sentence starter, the student understands that. The word that is very important, because if you drop the word that, you're going to end up with a traditional objective. But if you keep the word that, and then you follow the little rules of never put a proper noun, so we wouldn't put Japan on line 3, because that would lock it in time and place and would be a fact. So we have to pick something that we can use in place of Japan, and the idea that you want to end up with on line 3 is an idea that transcends time, transcends cultures. Okay? So everybody, let's take about 3 minutes. See if you can come up with a sentence by putting, with your neighbors, see if you can put 2 or more of those concepts together and make a finish to that sentence. Don't put Japan up there. Now, if you need another concept that I didn't say, you can go ahead and pick up other concepts. Oh, all of a sudden we hush down. Who has one already? Do we have somebody that is already finished and can tell us one? I see your hand up there. Go ahead. Yes, natural disasters impact living things and environments. Very good. Okay, let's give them a hand. Nice job. Good. All right, I have a lot of training that I do on how to write powerful and clear generalizations, and so I think I've described it in some of my books, and so you've probably seen that, but we're not going to have time to get into that. But that's the right idea. If you didn't finish, that's your homework assignment for tonight. Before you go to sleep, wordsmith that nice, powerful idea, okay? Thanks so much for sharing. I want to talk now a little shift about the key concepts and significant concepts, and I want to show you the power of what I call a conceptual lens, which would be your key concept or sometimes your significant concepts, as a tool to develop synergistic thinking, which I mentioned earlier. And so what I'd like you to do is look at this topic, the global economy, and watch how it changes emphasis as I shift a conceptual lens across the top. Are you thinking about the relationship now, you see? What about this? Isn't it interesting that when you change the conceptual lens, you change the focus of the unit and of what you're thinking about? It's very, very powerful. But what this does is cause synergistic thinking. And sometimes if you let students choose a conceptual lens for something you're working with, you're really valuing their intellect because you're saying, I'm not telling you what to say about the global economy and power and influence, but I'm inviting you to bring your own intellect to think about the global economy in terms of power and influence, say at the diploma level. It's so powerful because it causes the students to think synergistically. It isn't just facts they're applying, it's using a concept as a lens to look at a topic that has a lot of factual information. So I put 3 topics at the bottom of this page, and just with your partners, pick one of those topics: developing nations, the European Union, or global trade. And I'd like you to try out some of the different conceptual lenses that I use in my work and see which ones you like. Go ahead and try out some lenses for your topic with your neighbors. Okay? So these concepts pull thinking above the topic to the conceptual level, and they create a synergy in the brain between the factual and the conceptual levels of thinking. They value the student's intellect, and they're great fun. They're really great fun. And teachers can choose the lenses. Whenever we invite our students to look at a topic through a conceptual lens, we are engaging their personal intellect and emotions. And if we do that, we're going to create a deeper level of understanding, not only of the facts, but also of the conceptual level. We're going to help students retain the facts because they have to think about them at a deeper level, and they start to create personal relevance when they think about facts through their conceptual mind. It also fosters a greater level of learning, and you find students are more motivated when you use the conceptual level with factual knowledge, because we are thinking beings. And if you tell me not to just go study facts, but you tell me to think about facts through a concept, you're valuing my intellect and you're engaging my mind at a higher personal level, and I'm going to be a much more motivated learner. If I'm a passive recipient of information, I'm not very motivated because nothing has grabbed my intellect. But if you invite me to think about a topic through a conceptual lens and then do a project with that, I'm going to be very happy. And another point is that only at the conceptual level do we have the transfer of knowledge. And for today, the kind of information that we're dealing with, the more information we gain, the higher level of abstraction we must rise to in order to organize that massive amount of information. Because if we don't organize it by the concepts, then information floods over students, massive amounts of information, and it goes in one ear and out the other. I dare say that unit I showed you earlier on World War I and II, that so much of that information is going to go in and out because the student has nothing to hang the lessons of history, no lessons of history to think about that information. I wrote a whole book, my Thinking Classroom book, for this one paragraph. To develop the intellect and increase motivation for learning, curriculum and instruction must create a synergy between the factual and the conceptual levels of thinking. And so I'm going to be showing you a little video clip soon of a teacher teaching concept-based, and I want you to notice how she creates synergistic thinking in her classroom. It is the conceptual mind that does these things. I'm just going to put them up and you can read them. So what I'd like to do now is explain to you the video clip that I brought. Now this video clip was done when I first started presenting quite a number of years ago. And ASCD wanted to film someplace where I was working. And so I suggested they go to Palos Park, Illinois, because I'd spent quite a bit of time with teachers developing a concept-based curriculum. But then I was on a plane flying home, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, I told ASCD to go there and film, but I had never seen the teachers teach. I'd trained them, and I felt very good about their training. They seemed to really get it. But I'm telling you, I was a nervous wreck because I was not there while they filmed. And so a little before Christmas, ASCD sent me the video clip, and I put it into the VCR, and those days VCR, and my husband was in the kitchen making a sandwich, and I started watching this teacher, and tears streamed down my face. And I said, Ken, put down the knife. Get in here. She gets it. She gets it. And I was so excited because it was the first time I'd seen my ideas actually implemented in the classroom with synergistic thinking. Now, I don't want you to start critiquing the teacher, oh, I wouldn't do it that way and I wouldn't do it that way. I want you to watch for what she's doing right. Because what she is doing has had students read 4 pieces of literature the first semester, different pieces of literature at the 3rd grade level. And in this clip that you're going to see, which is 10 minutes, she pulls their thinking above the 4 pieces of literature and integrates their thinking at the conceptual level. And I want you to notice why I say this is a concept-based 3-dimensional teacher. Watch how she guides the students inductively to come up with the big idea, she calls it. It is a structured inquiry because remember, she's teaching them how to bridge from facts, from text material, across 4 books to come up with a big idea, which is a generalization that would transfer. So if we could watch the video now.
The government was asking Louis'
we need to go to the beginning. So it's not at the beginning. We're cutting in the video. We need to go back. We're not at the beginning. We need to go to the beginning of the video.
To see an example
there we
of
go.
How essential understandings can be reached from facts and concepts.
How about we say Ramona's perspective was that her father shouldn't smoke and smoking was bad? Well, Mr. Poe's perspective was he wanted to shoot the panda because he was eating the honey, but Louis' perspective on that was he told Mr. Poe no because that's the symbol of our country and soon we won't have any left.
In this lesson, the concept that we are working on is perspective.
A concept is going to be universal. That means we'll find it in any culture. It's going to be timeless. The nice thing about the concepts are that they will never change.
These third-grade students have read a number of books in social studies and literature. In this lesson, they'll analyze the facts and information from these books using the conceptual lens of perspective to arrive at an essential understanding.
You've given me some very good perspectives that you identified in the books that we've read this year. Now, what we want to do next is to take these examples of perspective and turn them into a big idea sentence. That's what we're going to do in this lesson. What is a big idea?
A big idea is something that's built of facts that you can carry through your whole life.
Okay, good. So those examples come together, and pretty soon we can start seeing a big idea come from the support of those examples. Very good. All right, let's begin here. What was the issue in the year of the panda? Patrick.
The government was asking Louis' family to move so the pandas could have more space.
What's happening to the panda? What word do we want to use to describe the condition, the situation of the panda? Michael?
Endangered.
Okay, so I'm going to write here the issue is the panda is endangered. Okay, now we're going to take the government's perspective. We're only going to look at the government's perspective on this issue, and we're going to write that right here. Now, we can see that the panda is endangered. The government thinks the panda should be saved because it's a symbol of China. How did the government behave? This column right here, the behavior, these are the facts from the book. So find a page in your book that proves what the government did. Okay, Tim, what page are you on?
On page 3 says, Louis sat in the corner of the courtyard and listened. He heard, "The government will not force you. They are asking you to move, for the reasons I have explained."
Okay, so we have a fact here right from the book that proves what the government did and how it behaved. All right, so I'm going to write that down here. I designed the activities so that they would be sequential, so that the kids would start with facts and use the facts to support the concept. So we have 3 facts here, 3 facts that will help us to support our big idea sentence when we get to that part of the lesson. All right, let's think about Ramona and her father. What was the perspective? James?
Ramona's perspective was that smoking gives you cancer and it gives you black lungs.
Okay. And so that's why I wanted them to think about the issue in the book, which would help them think about the perspective and talk about how the perspective comes from issues. All right, Annie and the Old One. What is the issue in Annie and the Old One? Kathy?
Annie's grandmother was dying.
Okay. So Annie's grandmother, the chart is a visual aid which shows step by step how to think and how we got to this point. So when we get to the big idea, they can see, oh, this is what we did. You know, we started here with facts, we thought about the facts and discussed them, and then we came to this big idea. And Ben Franklin thought that the taxes were unfair to the colonists. And so he behaved in a certain way, didn't he? He went to England and he spoke with the British, and finally he did convince them to repeal the Stamp Act. All right. Now, we have lots of information on our chart. What we want to do now is talk about our chart a little bit and see if we can come up with a big idea. I want you to think about the relationship between perspective and behavior. In your groups, first think, then discuss, and come up with a big idea sentence. Remember, a big idea sentence has to be something that worked in the past and can work now in your own life.
Because essential understandings are made up of concepts, their attributes are similar to those of a concept.
Essential understandings are universal, They're ideas that transfer through time and across cultures. They're abstract and broad by nature.
Okay. Well, it goes with the year of the panda too. But I don't know about.
So let's hear some of the big idea sentences that you created. All right, Catherine, let's hear yours, your groups.
People's perspective can change people's behavior.
Very good. All right, let's hear this group's. Karen, what is your group's big idea sentence?
People's perspectives affect their behavior.
And what do you mean by that?
In Annie and the Old One, when her grandmother said that she was going to die when the weaving in her loom was done, she started trying to prevent her grandma from weaving the loom because she thought if she could prevent her from weaving the loom, she could prevent death. And another one was in Meet Ben Franklin, because he decided to act and take a stand and try and convince the English to repeal the Stamp Act.
Good, good. So Annie's perspective and Ben Franklin's perspective both made them act in certain ways. It's important for children to know how to take facts and move them to a higher level, because those essential understandings are things, as the children in my classroom said, are things that they can take and use in their own lives. All right, I'm going to take all your great ideas. Your big idea sentences were terrific. And I'm going to put down one big idea sentence, and then you can tell me if you think that that represents what you all thought. I'm going to say that people's perspectives influence their, who knows what word I'm going to put on here? Very good. Influences their behavior.
I think one of the things that's really important is that we shouldn't be teaching kindergarten through grade 12 to the same level of ideas. And concept-based curriculum allows us to spiral concepts, but meet different topics related to those concepts as we progress through the grades. Okay. Now, before I go on to this, I want you to have a little bit of discussion among yourselves. What things did you see that would let us know this is a concept-based three-dimensional teacher? And did you pick out where students were doing synergistic thinking between the factual and the conceptual levels? So go ahead and have a little bit of discussion about that, and then we'll talk about it. About another 30 seconds. Do you feel the students understood the factual content? Yes. Do you feel the students were comfortable with working at the conceptual level as well as the factual level? Did anybody pick out where students were doing synergistic thinking? Raise your hand. Yes, stand and nice and loud for all of us. Yes. When the little girl at the end gave 2 different factual examples to support her big idea was one place. Also, another place was when she sent them into the cooperative learning groups. Do you remember what she asked them to do? Do you remember her direction to them for cooperative group? Yes, and I'll tell you, I watched it 5 times before I really picked up the significant direction, and that was, I want you to think about the relationship between perspective and behavior. They'd already done some traditional study with the literature the first semester, although she did use the conceptual lens of perspective as they went into each book in the first semester. Now in this lesson, she's adding the conceptual lens of behavior, and her direction was to think about the relationship. So it's very structured because she's trying to get them to link facts to those concepts and come up with a big idea. And if you listen carefully, when they went into cooperative groups, you heard a little boy say, yeah, and it goes with the year of the panda too. What was he doing? He was transferring the big idea and testing it against the other books. You see why it's so powerful to have the conceptual level? It's just absolutely amazing. Imagine if students go through all the years to high school with this kind of teaching, what quality thinkers they will be. It's absolutely amazing. And if you notice the graphic organizer, she worked both with text material and with the concepts. And it was a wonderful graphic organizer because she had perspectives and behavior up at the top, the books listed down the side, and she asked them to go find factual examples of each concept. Therefore, she made sure they knew each concept, and then she had them do inquiry to come up with a big idea that linked the concepts. And that's what generalizations and conceptual ideas are. They're statements of conceptual relationship that can be transferred through time and across cultures. I'd like to just end by saying, to make continuous progress in improving education, we must maintain a very dynamic balance between challenge and comfort as we strive to inspire our young people to think deeply, to question openly, to risk personally, to care for others. I think there's another one somewhere hiding down there, unless my thing died. Well, my thing died. So I guess those are the ones we'll end with. But how's that for an ending? But I want to tell you, I've enjoyed so presenting to you. I hope that you learned something that you can bring into your work with IB. I love this organization. I love all of you, and thank you so much.